Hello, everyone, and welcome to Heads Up, the weekly podcast of the National Headache Foundation. I'm Dr. Lindsay Weitzel, migraine strategist, founder of the Facebook group Migraine Nation, and chronic daily migraine survivor. This week, our topic is Headache on the Hill, which is so exciting and such an amazing way for all of us to get involved in advocacy. So I am here today with Katie McDonald, who is with the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy. Hi, Katie. How are you doing?
Hi there. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Katie is awesome, and she's here to tell us all about Headache on the Hill 2020. So I want to go ahead and get started and let her start talking. Katie, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about who you are and how you got involved in Headache on the Hill?
Sure. So I am a person with chronic migraine. I have had migraine for a little over 30 years now. And I think like many people, I started just being episodic in high school, getting a couple a year, and then kind of increased to a couple a month. And then probably about 9 years ago, I became chronic. And now I'm get daily migraine. But I am faring as well as I can, coping as well as I can, and I've kind of reestablished myself over the last couple of years. I work from home now for the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy and also for Miles for Migraine.
Okay.
I went to my first Headache on the Hill in 2015. My provider, Dr. Shapiro, is, as you'll hear more about, is very involved in Headache on the Hill. And
he invited on the podcast before last year while we were at Headache on the Hill. So some people may remember Dr. Shapiro.
Great. Yes. He's an amazing advocate. And just from talking with him, I found out about Headache on the Hill and I was really interested in it for many years. And in 2015, he invited me to come and it was a life-changing experience for me.
Yes, it is truly awesome. And we will get more into this, but I was at my first Headache on the Hill last year. And so it was extremely exciting for me. And I would also say it was life-changing. So we will get more into that. So can you tell us, Katie, can you just go back and tell us how Headache on the Hill got started, what its purpose is for people who don't know?
Yes. So Headache on the Hill was started back in 2007. Dr. Bob Shapiro and Kathy Gardner had attended the American Academy of Neurology, the AAN's Neurology on the Hill program. And they were also taking part in a special leadership training program called the Palatucci program. And through the Palatucci program, they had to come up with a special project. And so they decided that there was a need for advocacy specific, not just to neurology, but specific to migraine and headache disease.
Right.
So they put together this meeting in DC in September of 2007. And the goal was to bring together people with migraine, providers for people with migraine, and researchers to come in person to DC and speak to members of Congress about the impact of the disease and the lack of funding. And from there, it really, that's where it took off from. After that event, the following year in 2008, they formed the Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy. That became an organization. And so AHDA is the organization that puts on Headache on the Hill each year.
Right.
And AHDA is made up of 14 different migraine and headache disease nonprofit organizations. So when it formed, the idea was that AHDA would take care of the advocacy piece for each of the nonprofit organizations, and they wouldn't have to worry about handling that on their own. So we all kind of come together under this one umbrella to work towards these issues each year.
Okay. So I just want to give people an idea of the growth, because I've seen the pictures even. For example, it's such a good visual of how Headache on the Hill started and how it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger. So how many people were involved in Headache on the Hill in 2007? And then how many people were involved, for example, last year?
Yeah, so that's one of our big success stories, I think, is it's grown so much. The first year there was 45 people, and it was primarily headache providers, just a couple of people with migraine. There were 29 states represented. Last year, or this year, I should say, in February, we had 160 advocates. About 60 to 65% of them were people with migraine, patients, and we represented 42 states.
Wow.
So we're really growing, and we're hopeful to get to a point where we have all 50 states represented. The first year they visited 136 offices on both the House and the Senate side, which represents about 25% of all the offices.
Right.
This year, we did 223 offices, which is 41% of all the offices. One of the things I'm most proud of is the fact that this organization has accomplished so much with so little. The AHDA has a really, really tiny budget. We don't, what's very, maybe not well known and very uncommon for groups that do advocacy in DC is that we don't accept any money from pharmaceutical industry.
Okay.
So all of our funding comes from our member organizations, and it's very limited. We basically just have enough to put on Headache on the Hill each year, and the organization is primarily run by volunteer effort. With all that said, you know, over the last 12 years, there's been a lot of kind of stepwise progression through these asks that we've been working on. And one of our big successes was in 2016, we actually had a bill signed into law. So the work that we had been doing as advocates, the patients, the providers, AHDA, everyone together played a role in getting this bill signed into law. And I have it hanging up right next to my desk, and I look at it every day. And it just, the one piece of language in that bill that's so critical to us is that it says that when the NIH allocates their budget moving forward, the bill was the Stop Pain Act, and in there it says that they will pay attention to disease burden when figuring out how to allocate their budgets. So, as many people know, migraine it's the second most disabling disease in the world, and it has one of the lowest rates of funding for research. So by stating that in the bill, as future funding becomes available for NIH, they ideally are going to need to increase the proportion of funding that goes to migraine and headache disease research. This year in February, we had two different asks. One was for the NIH. So they have the HEAL initiative was passed, and for the last 2 years there's been $500 million in additional funding for pain research, essentially. And we're asking that as part of those funds, which part of them are set aside for headache, but that there needs to be specific, what's called a request for application, where the NIH puts out a call for people who may be interested in doing research on headache disorders. And this means it doesn't have to be a headache specialist that's doing the research. And this is really the only way we're going to get people to do more research on headache disease. We're kind of at a point where we've got the funding, but people don't know that the funding is available.
Right.
So we went to our members of Congress with a request to put in report language into their committee reports. And we actually, so we learned back in May that the House did accept our ask, and our language was included in the committee report, the Appropriations Committee. And we just found out last night that the Senate actually also included our report language in the Senate Appropriations report. So it's hot off the press.
That's
and
fabulous.
Yes. So we were successful.
First to know, yay.
And we also had a second ask this year, which was related to Social Security. So many people on migraine are familiar with SSI or SSDI, the Social Security insurance. And right now there's no listing in the Blue Book for migraine, even though it's the second most disabling disease.
Right. Meaning it's difficult to get disability if migraine is what your condition is.
Exactly.
Right.
Since it's not in the book, they refer to actually the epilepsy section of the neurological listings. So we were asking that this this book called the Blue Book, listing of impairments, have a listing included for migraine. And we were also asking that kind of in the meantime, before we can get that listing added, at least explain what the guidelines are that you're using to evaluate somebody who's applying for disability.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also ask that they update these listings every 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so similar to our success with the NIH report language, we just found out that that report language was included in the Senate Appropriations Committee report yesterday. We already knew it was in the House. And on August 26th, kind of in between the House and the Senate report language completions, the Social Security Administration issued what's called a Social Security ruling, which is where they came out and explained what are the steps and processes that they go through for evaluation of somebody with headache disorders.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a huge accomplishment. We've been working for years to try to get this information from them. And while it wasn't perfect, and we still have a long way to go in terms of what we'll consider success, we're really excited to see this progress from.
So it sounds like today was very timely day to do the podcast and to talk to people, because we just learned some successes from this year's Headache on the Hill, and that things are really worth it. So let's go to, for people who want to get involved, because I'm hoping to reach out and find people that want to get involved. Who should apply to attend Headache on the Hill?
Yeah, it's a unique event. We are looking for people with migraine, people with cluster disease, any headache disease, even caregivers for people of headache or migraine disease, and or physicians, headache specialists, people who treat people with migraine. Doesn't have to be a physician, healthcare provider.
Right.
It's definitely not an event for everyone. It's 2 very intense days down in DC. So you have to travel to DC. We do a day of training, half day of training on, what the asks will be and how to prepare yourself for your meetings with your member of Congress. And then the second day of Headache on the Hill is when we actually go to the Hill and we set up meetings for you, and you meet with your member of Congress, you meet with your representatives and senators. And it takes a lot out of a person. So there's a lot of walking around DC, going back and forth between the House and the Senate buildings. It's emotionally draining. You're sharing your story about how migraine has impacted you, or, if you're a caregiver, how it's impacted your loved ones. And to be perfectly honest, people get nervous before attending this event, which is totally normal. We make sure you're going to be in a good place, but all of those things combined basically are a great recipe for migraine or cluster attack. So you have to be somebody who's pretty, I would say, high on the functional scale of living with your migraine disease and being able to multitask and kind of get through a day, even if you get a migraine attack. And not everyone's in a position to do that right now. So definitely want to think about whether this is something that you can take on.
I would say that, so last year was, as I said, my first Headache on the Hill. And I would say that functionally, at this point in my life, finally, I'm very functional. I had a migraine essentially every day for 30 years. And now I guess I'm, chronic migraine, but for me, it was more emotional, which was surprising to me. And it's more because even though I am here and I share about migraine and everything, people might be surprised to know that I kept my disease completely secret for 40 years. And there I was sharing it in such an intense environment, and that was hard on me. So be prepared. If you apply, be prepared. You're sharing a very personal story that if you're not used to talking about it, it's going to be hard. And you are walking all day. It's tiring. This is not your own schedule. People are setting your schedule. So be prepared, but it is so worth it. If you think you can physically handle it and emotionally handle it, it's very worth it. It's a wonderful experience.
I think you, sorry to interrupt, I think you made a great point too, that another thing that makes a really good applicant is somebody who can speak well and be able to be concise with their thoughts. It's easy when someone says to you, tell me about how you've been impacted by migraine. Well, I've had migraine for 30 years. Where do I start? Right? I could talk for hours, but these meetings are really short, and you have to be able to share your story, which is your main purpose for being there, and present our ask all within just a couple of minutes. So you need to be comfortable with public speaking, I would say.
Exactly.
That this is an event you have to apply for. We have an application process. So not everyone that wants to go, unfortunately, we can't take everybody that's interested in going. But what happens is each fall, we open up our application process. If you want to be alerted to that, the best thing to do is to go to the AHDA website, which is Alliance for Headache Disorders Advocacy.org. I think you can Google AHDA as well, and you'll find us.
And we're going to have that across the screen.
Great. And so sign up there for our newsletter, and we send out, the first people to be notified are the people on our newsletter mailing list. We'll send out the link to the application, and then we'll also post it to our Facebook page after a week or so.
Okay. What is the cost to the advocate when if you come out?
Yeah, if you get selected to come to Headache on the Hill, you are responsible for your own transportation to and from DC. So for most people, that means buying an airline ticket. We cover 1 or 2 nights for the advocates, kind of depending on where you're coming from and what your situation is. But if you need more time, some people like to come in a day or 2 early and stay a little longer because they're maybe not feeling well enough to travel right away. That would be at your own expense. And then we provide a couple of meals while you're there, but you also would be responsible for some of your own meals. So, I'd love, at some point we'll get to a point with our organization where we can better support the advocates for all the time they put into coming to DC. Right. But for right now, there is expense associated with it.
Okay. Now, when can people apply for Headache on the Hill 2020, and when is the last date that you can apply?
Yeah, we will be opening up applications this year on October 15th.
Okay.
And they'll be open for a month, so you'll have until November 15th to apply. Okay. And then our plan is to notify people by early to mid-December, so you'll know before the holidays whether you've been accepted or not.
Okay. And when is Headache on the Hill 2020? I don't think we've told people that.
Oh yeah, it's February, I'm pretty sure 10th and 11th. It's a Monday and Tuesday in 2020.
All right. Is there anything else that you would like people to know about the upcoming Headache on the Hill?
There are, one of the things in talking about applications, there's some states we get a lot of people applying from, and then there's some states where, as I talked about earlier, 42 states, we're still missing some states. So I am especially looking for advocates from places like Alaska, Arkansas, Iowa, Idaho, Louisiana, Maine, Minnesota, Missouri, Mississippi, North Dakota, New Mexico, Nevada, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Dakota, and Wyoming.
Okay.
List your state. It doesn't mean I don't want you to come to Headache on the Hill, but some of the other states that I didn't list already have a lot of applicants, so it's just a little bit more competitive to get in, but we really need people from those states that I mentioned.
All right, I'm so glad you mentioned that. So yes, there are definitely a few states that that Headache on the Hill needs people from, that we're not full yet. So if you didn't hear your state, it doesn't mean don't apply, but if you did hear your state, Headache on the Hill needs you. So definitely go to the website.
Yes. And I think, we don't know yet what our asks are going to be for 2020, like I mentioned, but I would say, I think similar to what you mentioned, after my first experience at Headache on the Hill, I was just totally hooked. And I think it really changed the way I handle myself in terms of my journey with migraine disease. It's made me into a better advocate. And I've heard other people say that as well, that it's just one of the most amazing experiences you can take on. It's kind of the lemonade from the lemon of dealing with migraine, to have this opportunity to, drive policy change for everybody in our country, and go to speak to your members of Congress. So I can't recommend it enough. I think it's an amazing opportunity, no matter what the ask is.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being on Heads Up, Katie.
Yeah.
And this is Katie and Lindsay signing out from this week's episode of Heads Up. We will see you again next week. Everyone, have a great day.